the people that he decides to appoint to very important positions, including this one, because I did have to make sure that I wasn't going crazy. But when I say that you are the least qualified FBI director in the history of the FBI, that is real, because you are the only one that never even served with the FBI prior to joining, yet we are supposed to believe that you are the greatest thing since sliced bread. I didn't ask you a question. When people sit around and say things like, oh, you know, we're happy because now we feel safe. I don't know who feels safe in this country except for the white supremacists.
The Federal Bureau of Investigation was established in 1908. In 117 years of existence, it has had 9 directors. Every single one of them, before leading the Bureau, had spent significant time working inside federal law enforcement. Most had worked inside the FBI itself. Several had risen through its ranks over decades. Until now. Because for the first time in 117 years, the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation has never worked a single day inside the organization he leads. And his deputy, the second most powerful official in the Bureau, is a former podcaster and Fox News commentator who also has no FBI experience. Combined FBI experience at the top of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 2025, 0 years. That number is not a political opinion. It is not a partisan talking point. It is a documented historical fact. And it raises a specific question that this documentary is going to answer. What actually happens to a law enforcement institution when the people leading it have never done the work it exists to do? The Federal Bureau of Investigation is not a political organization. It is not supposed to be. Its mandate covers domestic counterterrorism, foreign counterintelligence, cybercrime, public corruption, civil rights enforcement, organized crime, and the protection of children from exploitation. These are not abstract responsibilities. They are active, ongoing operations that require institutional knowledge built over years, networks of informants developed through patient relationship building, case files maintained across administrations, threat assessments that depend on understanding patterns that only emerge over time. When the hearing room in Washington produces shouting, insults, and competing claims about crime statistics, all of that disappears behind the political theater. What does not disappear are the specific, documented institutional decisions that have been made in the 8 months since Kash Patel took office. The experienced agents who are no longer there. The task forces that have been restructured or disbanded. The resources redirected from cases that do not serve the administration's priorities. Those decisions are real. They have consequences that extend well beyond any single hearing. And those consequences are what Representative Jasmine Crockett was actually trying to put on the congressional record in that hearing room. Not the insults. Not the political theater. The institutional math. Kash Patel was confirmed as FBI Director on February 20, 2025. The Senate vote was 50-49. The closest confirmation vote for any FBI director in modern history. Before his appointment, Patel's professional background included work as a federal public defender, a federal prosecutor, a senior staffer on the House Intelligence Committee, Deputy Director of National Intelligence, and Chief of Staff at the Department of Defense. That is a significant resume in national security. The chairman of the House Judiciary Committee read every line of it into the record during the September hearing. What that resume does not include is time inside the Federal Bureau of Investigation. His confirmed deputy, Dan Bonino, previously served in the Secret Service. He then became a podcaster. Then a Fox News commentator. He has no FBI experience either. The historical significance of this combination was noted not just by Democratic critics but by former FBI officials across political lines who publicly raised concerns about institutional continuity before either man was confirmed. Their concerns were specific. Not about political loyalty. About operational knowledge. The FBI's effectiveness in counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and complex criminal investigations depends on something that cannot be acquired in weeks or months. It depends on understanding how the Bureau actually works from the inside. Who the key relationships are. Where the institutional memory lives. What has been tried before and why it succeeded or failed. That knowledge cannot be briefed into someone. It has to be lived. And the people who lived it longest are the ones who are no longer there.
confidence when you're sitting up here telling the Senate yesterday that it will take you 14 years before you can get the FBI fully staffed to do their jobs? You're also now redirecting resources so that they can go and play ICE agents on the streets. You're getting rid of your most qualified people. And even when it came down to somebody that you consider to be a friend, you were posted up having some fancy dinner to the extent that you posted not only once erroneously, you posted twice erroneously as it relates to catching somebody. And then you want to go and say, let me take a victory lap. Because honestly, if it wasn't for parents deciding that they were going to turn in their child, it seems like y'all wouldn't have got there, even though he literally confessed online. So I'm confused about what it is that the FBI is doing, except for trying to put on a show for the apprentice, or whatever you want to call him. The day after all of this took place, there was domestic terrorism that was taking place at HBCUs. They were targeted. Yet I didn't hear anything from the FBI about what was going on. And again, black people kept saying, how did we end up in this? Because the numbers are so very clear that white supremacy is a problem.
14 years. That number did not come from Representative Crockett. It did not come from a Democratic opposition research file. It came from Kash Patel himself, the day before this exchange, in testimony to the United States Senate. He estimated it would take 14 years to fully staff the Federal Bureau of Investigation back to operational capacity. 14 years from today would be 2039. To put that in historical context, 14 years ago from the date of this hearing was 2011. That was the year Osama bin Laden was killed. The year the Arab Spring began reshaping the Middle East. The year the United States still had over 90,000 troops in Afghanistan. In the 14 years between 2011 and 2025, the threat landscape facing the United States changed in ways that no one in 2011 could have fully predicted. Domestic terrorism accelerated. Cyber threats from state actors multiplied. Foreign influence operations became a documented reality affecting every major American election cycle. The FBI adapted to those threats over 14 years because experienced people inside the Bureau built the institutional response. What gets built in the next 14 years to address threats we cannot yet predict depends entirely on the institutional foundation that exists today. And that foundation is what the staffing crisis Patel himself described in the Senate actually threatens. Behind the institutional numbers are three specific human stories that Crockett placed on the Congressional record. And each one tests a different aspect of the qualification gap this documentary is examining. The first is Steve Jensen. Jensen spent his career working counterterrorism and national security cases inside the FBI. He was part of the Bureau's oversight structure for the January 6 investigation, the largest domestic terrorism prosecution in American history, involving over 1,400 defendants across multiple years. That investigation required enormous institutional knowledge. Understanding which cases connected to which defendants. Which informant networks had produced reliable information. Which prosecutorial strategies had succeeded or failed in prior domestic extremism cases. Jensen had that knowledge. He was fired. The second is Brian Driscoll. Driscoll's record inside the Bureau was not ordinary. The Medal of Valor is the FBI's highest honor for exceptional courage in the line of duty. He earned it. He also led the Newark Field Office, one of the Bureau's most operationally active divisions, at a senior level. When he was asked to supply names of agents who had worked on January 6 cases, he declined. His federal lawsuit describes that refusal as the reason he was removed. Patel has denied this characterization entirely. The court will produce a documented answer. But here is what is not in dispute. Driscoll's institutional knowledge, accumulated over 20 years, expressed in two of the Bureau's most demanding leadership roles, left the FBI the day he was fired. The third is Walter Giardina. Giardina's case carries a human weight that the institutional argument alone does not capture. He was fired while his wife was days from dying of a terminal illness. A fellow agent went directly to Patel and personally requested mercy. The request was denied. Giardina lost his career, his institutional knowledge, and his income during the final days of his wife's life. Patel has attributed all 3 terminations to performance failures and constitutional duty standards. He has not provided specific public documentation for those determinations. He has cited ongoing litigation as the reason. The 3 cases between them represent something specific. Not just 3 individual injustices, if they are that, but 3 specific nodes of institutional knowledge about counterterrorism, domestic extremism, and complex investigation management that are no longer available to the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
The day after all of this took place, there was domestic terrorism that was taking place at HBCUs. They were targeted. Yet I didn't hear anything from the FBI about what was going on. And again, black people kept saying, how did we end up in this? Because the numbers are so very clear that white supremacy is a problem. And honestly, I've not heard anything out of you today that makes me believe that you're going to do anything about the white supremacy problem. The one that is leading to children being killed, children being shot, as well as members of their community as they're working.
That last claim, the one about the HBCU, is the most underreported moment in this entire hearing. A historically black college or university was targeted by a domestic terrorism incident. Crockett stated this on the Congressional record. She said it happened the day after the hearing in question. She said the FBI issued no public alert, no press conference, no public communication to the institution, its students, or the broader public. Domestic terrorism response is a core FBI function. It is not secondary. It is not optional. When an educational institution is targeted because of who attends it, the Bureau's response, its speed, its public communication, its institutional presence, is exactly the kind of thing that the experience of the leadership team determines. Patel did not address the HBCU claim in his response. He cited crime statistics. He referenced child predator captures and drug seizures and the national murder rate. He did not say the FBI responded to the HBCU attack and here is what we did. That absence from the record matters. Because the institutional question at the center of this documentary is not whether Kash Patel is a good person or a bad person. It is not whether he worked hard or
came down to somebody that you consider to be a friend. You were posted up having some fancy dinner to the extent that you posted not only once erroneously, you posted twice erroneously as it relates to catching somebody, and then you want to go and say, let me take a victory lap, because honestly, if it wasn't for parents deciding that they were going to turn in their child, it seems like y'all wouldn't have got there, even though he literally confessed online.
The Charlie Kirk sequence is the most operationally specific accusation Crockett raised in the entire hearing. And it requires careful separation of what is confirmed from what is alleged. Here is what is confirmed. Charlie Kirk, a prominent conservative political figure, was killed in Utah. The FBI was involved in the investigation alongside state and local law enforcement. A suspect was identified and apprehended. The case was solved. Here is what Crockett alleged and what has been reported but not officially confirmed on the Congressional record. First, that Patel was at a dinner when the suspect was still at large. Second, that he posted incorrect information on social media twice claiming the suspect had been apprehended before the apprehension actually occurred. Third, that the family of the suspect made the decisive decision to turn their child in, prompted in part by the suspect's own online confession. Patel disputed the characterization of events. He pointed to the result: the suspect was caught, as evidence of the FBI's effectiveness. But here is the specific question Crockett's account raises that the result alone does not answer. If the family's decision to come forward and the suspect's online confession were the primary factors that produced the apprehension, what specifically did the FBI's involvement contribute in the critical hours before that happened? That question was not answered in the hearing. And it matters because it connects directly to the experience gap. A director who understands the operational culture of a complex criminal investigation does not post real-time updates on social media while a suspect is still at large. That is not a political judgment. It is an operational one. It is exactly the kind of judgment that institutional experience builds. And then something happened that almost no coverage connected to this moment. Christopher Rufo, one of the most prominent conservative political strategists in the country, a man who has been closely aligned with the Trump administration's agenda, publicly called for Kash Patel's removal. Not a Democrat. Not a media critic. Not a political opponent. A conservative strategist whose alignment with this administration has been consistent and documented. He cited the Kirk episode specifically. That detail does not appear in any competitor coverage of this hearing. It belongs in this one. The Cato Institute is a libertarian-leaning think tank. It does not have a democratic political alignment. Its research is frequently cited by conservatives. Its credibility on government spending and policy analysis is broadly accepted across political lines. The Cato Institute found that approximately 20% of all FBI agents had been redirected from their primary investigative assignments to support immigration enforcement operations under Patel's leadership. 20%. At the time of this hearing, the FBI employed approximately 35,000 people including agents, analysts, and support staff. A 20% redirection of operational agents represents a significant shift in where the Bureau's human resources are actually deployed on any given day. Now place that figure alongside the 14-year staffing estimate Patel provided to the Senate. If the Bureau is already understaffed to the point where full operational recovery will take 14 years, redirecting 20% of available agents to immigration enforcement is not a neutral administrative decision. It is a decision that takes resources from counterterrorism, cybercrime, public corruption, and child exploitation investigations and deploys them to a function that the Bureau was not primarily designed to perform. The FBI's post-September 11 reallocation of resources is a useful comparison point. Following the worst domestic terrorist attack in American history, the Bureau shifted approximately 1,234 agents to counterterrorism operations. According to the Cato Institute figure cited in the House hearing, the reallocation to immigration enforcement under Patel has exceeded that number. More agents redirected for immigration enforcement than were redirected for counterterrorism after September 11. That is a documented institutional shift. Not a political characterization. The numbers are the characterization.
Living the American dream. And anyone that thinks the American dream is dead, just look right here. You're talking to a first-generation Indian kid who's about to lead the law enforcement community of the greatest nation on God's green earth. That can't happen anywhere else.
Both things Patel said in that response are true. He is the son of immigrants. His story is one that the American dream was designed to produce. There is nothing false or performative about that pride, and it belongs in any honest account of this story. And J. Edgar Hoover was a white nationalist who ran the Bureau as a personal political instrument for nearly 5 decades. The history of the FBI is not a clean institutional story. It is a complicated one. COINTELPRO. The surveillance of civil rights leaders. The blackmailing of politicians. The systematic targeting of dissidents. The Bureau's credibility as an institution of neutral law enforcement was not given. It was built, painstakingly, over decades, by successive directors who worked to separate the Bureau's function from the political loyalties of individual administrations. That rebuilding process happened because experienced people inside the Bureau pushed for it. Because agents who had lived through the Hoover era understood what the alternative looked like. The first-generation immigrant narrative and the institutional competence narrative are not in conflict. They are separate arguments about separate things. One is about who Patel is. The other is about whether the people at the top of the Federal Bureau of Investigation have the operational knowledge to lead it effectively. Both matter. Only one of them is being measured by the 14-year staffing timeline, the 20% reallocation, and the 3 decorated agents who are no longer there. Patel's strategy across both days of House Judiciary testimony was consistent and deliberate. Every specific accusation was met with aggregate crime statistics. Child predator captures. Drug seizures. Murder rates at historic lows. This strategy works for a specific reason. National crime statistics are real. They are measured. They are verifiable. And a director who can point to improved national crime numbers is on documentable ground when he says the Bureau is succeeding in its mission. But the strategy has a structural limitation that Crockett and Raskin both identified. National crime statistics are not primarily determined by the FBI. They are determined by state and local law enforcement agencies, which handle the vast majority of criminal investigations in the United States. Murder is not a federal crime. Most violent crime is not a federal crime. The FBI's direct investigative jurisdiction covers specific categories of offenses that represent a fraction of the total crime picture. According to reporting referenced in the hearing transcript, former FBI Assistant Special Agent Michael Feinberg noted that Patel's crime statistics conflated federal and state law enforcement results in ways that overstated the Bureau's direct contribution. This is not a new political technique. It is a standard institutional defense. Take credit for what the broader system produces and present it as evidence of leadership effectiveness. What the strategy cannot address are the specific, documented operational questions. Why did the HBCU attack produce no public FBI response? What happened in the hours before the Kirk family decided to turn in their son? Why will it take 14 years to staff a bureau that has been operating for over a century? Crime statistics answer none of those questions. And in an oversight hearing, those are the questions that matter most. 3 specific developments that will determine how the institutional picture changes in the months ahead. The first is the Driscoll federal lawsuit. Active in Washington, D.C. federal court. Driscoll, Jensen, and Evans versus Patel and the Attorney General. If it reaches the discovery phase, documentation of personnel decisions becomes legally compelled. Communications about who was targeted and why, what standards were actually applied, and what role, if any, the White House played in specific firings will be subject to court-ordered production. The court will produce the answer that the hearing room could not compel. The second is the HBCU investigation status. No public federal communication about the incident has been confirmed. Congressional requests for information about the FBI's response to domestic terrorism incidents at educational institutions can be formally submitted. Whether those requests produce documented answers will tell you something specific about the Bureau's operational transparency on domestic terrorism cases. The third is the staffing timeline itself. Patel's 14-year estimate was made under oath in the Senate. It is now part of the permanent congressional record. Future oversight hearings can use that number as a documented baseline. If the Bureau's staffing situation improves faster than projected, that is documentable evidence of successful leadership. If it deteriorates, that is equally documentable. Either way, the number exists and it will be measured against reality. All 3 of these developments are moving. None of them depend on political interpretation. They depend on what courts compel, what oversight produces, and what time reveals. Here is the experience ledger. Complete. Built entirely from the verified public record. Combined FBI experience at the leadership level of the Federal Bureau of Investigation in 2025, 0 years. First time in 117 years. Staffing recovery timeline, per the Director's own Senate testimony, 14 years. Percentage of agents redirected from primary investigative functions, per Cato Institute, 20%. Experienced agents removed from specific counterterrorism and complex investigation roles since February 2025, with documented career histories in the Bureau's most demanding assignments, confirmed at minimum 3, with active federal litigation alleging the removals were politically motivated. HBCU domestic terrorism incident. No documented public FBI response cited in the congressional record. Charlie Kirk investigation. Family decision and online confession confirmed as contributing factors to resolution. Director's real-time social media activity during the investigation, alleged, disputed, not resolved on the official record. National crime statistics cited as evidence of success, real, measurable, and primarily determined by state and local law enforcement whose jurisdiction covers the overwhelming majority of American criminal cases. Those are the numbers. That is the ledger. What they add up to is a question that every American, regardless of political affiliation, should be able to ask without being accused of partisanship. Can an institution as operationally complex as the Federal Bureau of Investigation function at full capability when the people at the top have never worked inside it? The answer is not predetermined. Experience is not the only thing that matters in leadership. Vision, political will, and the ability to build strong teams have all produced effective institutional leaders who came from outside the organizations they led. But institutional experience is not nothing. It is the thing that tells you which questions to ask before a crisis, not after one. It is the thing that tells you not to post real-time updates on social media while a suspect is still at large. It is the thing that tells you an HBCU that has just been targeted by domestic terrorism deserves a public response before the next news cycle. It is the thing that 14 years of staffing recovery will eventually try to rebuild. Whether that rebuilding starts now or waits for the courts, the oversight committees, and the next administration is the question this documentary cannot answer. Only the documented record, built one verified fact at a time, will tell us. Here are the 2 questions AVA Reports is asking the community to debate right now. The first. Based on the experience ledger, 0 years of combined FBI experience at the director level, 14-year staffing recovery, 20% resource reallocation, and the HBCU silence, do you believe the qualification gap at the top of the Bureau has produced specific, documentable harm to the institution's core functions? Or do you believe the crime statistics Patel cited represent evidence that the gap has not mattered operationally? The second. Christopher Rufo, a prominent conservative strategist aligned with this administration, called for Patel's removal after the Charlie Kirk episode. When someone from within the same political coalition raises that specific concern, does that change how you evaluate the institutional argument? Yes or no, and tell me why. Drop both answers below. This community reads them. The debate matters. If you want coverage built on what the documented record actually shows, subscribe to AVA Reports and hit the notification bell. The next documentary in this series covers the legal case that will produce the answers this hearing could not. The Driscoll lawsuit enters its next phase in federal court. We will be there when it does. Thank you for watching.